Before the Conjuring franchise made them global superstars, they built an empire on one premise. They could see demons. Were their divine gifts a true calling, or was it the greatest, most profitable hoax of the paranormal age? Today, we're not just looking at ghosts. We're tracking the money, the lawsuits, and the connections that turned their holy war into a global conspiracy. Follow me down the rabbit hole about Ed and Lorraine Warren. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about Ed and Lorraine Warren. Thank you, Teagues, the Daily Conspiracy Podcast, and Conspiracy Chaos Podcast for requesting this episode. Yes, the guys at both those podcasts said that I should cover this, so here we are. We're doing it. But of course, before we jump in, we love to thank our sponsors. So thank you, Wise Wolf Gold, for sponsoring my podcast. Guys, if you want gold and silver delivered straight to your front door for as little as $50 a month, go to rabbithole.gold right now. But let's dive in. Ed Warren was born on September 7th, 1926, to Frank Miney and Pauline Dennis in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Ed's father, Frank, was a police officer. There are not many details about Ed's mother except that she was a typical Catholic woman of her time. Ed claimed to have grown up in a haunted house in Connecticut from the age of 5 until he was 12 years old. Ed frequently said he would hear his closet door open around 2 or 3 in the morning, just seeing this like light form into this ball shape, and then eventually seeing a face in that ball that he called this ghost globule. In the globule, Ed would say there was a face of an old woman, and it would come out of the closet. And he would hear audible footsteps and heavy breathing, and his room would become this unnatural, like a psychic cold. Ed also recalled witnessing a flicker of light transform into an apparition of his family's deceased landlady when he was a child. Lorraine Rita Morin Warren was born on January 31st, 1927, to James Joseph Sr. and Georgiana Hamilton Morin in Devon, Connecticut. Lorraine claimed to have been clairvoyant and a light trance medium since she was very young. She said that at the age of 9, she could predict the future, and as a teenager, she was already convinced of her abilities and began seeing auras around people. She says she initially believed that everyone possessed these sixth sense, which I could probably understand as a kid trying to make it make sense. You're like, yeah, probably everybody sees these things or hears these things. Lorraine came from a Catholic family as well, and she attended a Catholic all-girls school. She reported that the nuns chastised and punished her for seeing things they deemed she shouldn't have been able to see. Ed and Lorraine met when Ed was working as an usher at the Colonial Theater in Bridgeport, Connecticut, at just 16 years old. Ed said he would see Lorraine come in with her mother every Wednesday night. Eventually, they would start talking and become friends, and then one night he asked to walk her home, and on that walk, he asked her for a date. Their relationship quickly became serious. On Ed's 17th birthday, he joined the U.S. Navy, serving in World War II in the Pacific and in Europe. Just 4 months into his service, his ship sank in the North Atlantic, and he was sent home for a 30-day survivor's leave. And during that time, Ed and Lorraine got married. After his service, Ed and Lorraine welcomed their daughter Judy Warren on July 6, 1950. Ed then attended Perry Art School, a subsidiary of Yale, for around 2 years. He sold many of his paintings, primarily depictions of haunted houses and New England winter scenes. Lorraine said both she and Ed, quote, had skills as landscape artists, and we each harbored a desire to paint, end quote. As a young couple, they would research homes that were allegedly haunted, then go there and sketch them. Sometimes the homeowners were present, and after completing their sketch, they would offer it in exchange for information about the events that had occurred in the homes. Lorraine stated, quote, if the story was engrossing enough, we'd paint up the house for our collection and then sell it at an art show, end quote. Ed and Lorraine soon began transitioning from artists to paranormal investigators. They professionalized paranormal investigation. The transition from painting alleged haunted houses to becoming professional paranormal investigators marked the birth of the Warrens' empire. Their initial approach was brilliantly optimistic, combining art with grassroots research, essentially trading a piece of art for an inside scoop on a haunting. This practice allowed them to gather a vast catalog of local legends and testimonies. By the early 1950s, the Warrens formalized their work by establishing the New England Society for Psychic Research, or NESPR. This was a pivotal moment as it lent an air of academic and scientific legitimacy to their claims. Ed, the showman and self taught demonologist, handled the public relations, while Lorraine, the seer and medium, provided the crucial evidence of the spiritual realm. The Nesper was framed as a serious organization dedicated to researching supernatural phenomenon. Under this banner, the Warrens developed a set of tools and a specific methodology that was heavily rooted in Catholic doctrine. Ed positioned himself as the expert on non human demonic entities and the necessary rites of exorcism. He often appeared as the authoritative protective figure, the one who understands the rules of spiritual combat. Lorraine's alleged ability to see auras, communicate with the dead, and perceive demonic presence was the core of their proof. She was the sensitive, the essential link between the material and spiritual worlds. Their marketing genius was in their branding. They weren't just ghost hunters, they were demonologists, a term that instantly upped the stakes from simple suspicious spookiness to religious authorities. They were the professionals. Their cases often revolved around the most terrifying type of haunting, demonic possession and infestation, requiring the intervention of the church. This narrative amplified their perceived importance and the danger of their work. The Warrens believed that demonic forces were likely to possess those who lack faith. The Warrens really sold their name with the Occult Museum. To consolidate their fame and create a physical center for their activities, the Warrens opened their Occult Museum in the back of their Monroe, Connecticut home. This wasn't just a place to store their finds. It was a carefully curated display of their most dangerous and high-profile work. Because as a demonologist, of course, it just makes sense to hold on to a collection of demon manipulated objects. Everybody knows that. The museum served multiple purposes. It was a source of income, charging visitors for tours, a powerful marketing tool, creating an air of a genuine, dangerous collection, and a physical manifestation of their spiritual war. Key artifacts like the Annabelle doll, a Raggedy Ann doll they claimed was possessed by a demon, became legendary. The story of Annabelle's containment, a supposedly demonic entity that took on the namesake of a deceased little girl locked behind glass, is a perfect example of their ability to turn an object into a piece of sensationalized, terrifying lore. The museum was their trophy room, a constant reminder of the battles they had supposedly won. The Annabelle doll story was made into a movie in 1970, making the Warrens Hollywood famous. This case began back in 1970 with a Raggedy Ann doll. It was a birthday gift from a mother to her daughter, Donna, a nurse who lived in a small apartment with her roommate, Angie. Donna initially loved the doll. When she came home from receiving it, she just kind of tossed it on her bed without giving it a second thought. That was a huge mistake. Within just a few days, both Donna and Angie noticed strange behavior. At first, it was subtle. The doll might have just changed its position on the bed, but the movements quickly escalated. They'd leave for work and come home to find Annabelle in a completely different room, sometimes even upright and standing on her feet. On one occasion, Donna left the doll on the couch and returned to find it back on her bed in her room with the door closed. The doll wasn't just moving, it was communicating. Donna and Angie began discovering messages scrawled out on parchment paper that they didn't own, written in a childlike script that read things like, "Help us," and "Help Lou." We'll get into who Lou is in just a second. The turning point was when Donna came home one night and found something even more disturbing, a liquid red substance that looked exactly like drops of blood on the back of the doll's hands and her chest. She was terrified. So they contacted a medium, not Ed Lorraine Warren right now, just a different medium, which was a crucial mistake. During a seance, the medium introduced them to the supposed spirit of Annabelle Higgins, which was this young girl who supposedly died on the property before the apartment complex was built. Donna felt compassion for the sad story and gave the spirit permission to inhabit the doll and stay with them, which turned out to be a demonic invitation. Lou, a friend of the nurses, had always hated the doll and repeatedly warned them that it was evil. One night, Lou woke up paralyzed and watched in horror as the Raggedy Ann doll slowly glided up his leg onto his chest and began to strangle him until he blacked out. His last encounter was even more violent. He was alone with Angie when he was suddenly attacked, spun around, and left with 7 distinct red claw-like scratch marks on his chest, 3 vertical and 4 horizontal. The scratches were hot like burns, and the Warrens later identified them as a terrifying display of pure demonic power. Finally convinced this wasn't a sweet little ghost, they called Ed and Lorraine Warren. When they arrived, they came to a powerful conclusion: the doll wasn't haunted, and a human spirit did not possess it. They explained that spirits don't possess objects, they possess people. This was an inhuman demonic entity that was simply manipulating the doll. It had feigned being a little girl to gain their trust and permission, moving the doll through teleportation as part of the infestation stage. Its actual goal all along was to possess a human host like one of the nurses. An Episcopal priest was called to perform a cleansing ritual on the apartment, and the Warrens took the doll. The drive home was brutal. Ed recounted that as they drove, the car began to violently swerve and stall, with the power steering and brakes failing every time they hit a dangerous curve. They claimed that the demon was fighting back. Ed finally had to reach back, douse Annabelle in holy water, and make the sign of a cross over her to make the disturbances stop. The doll found its permanent home in a sealed case in the Warrens Occult Museum, where it resides to this day. Even in the museum, her influence persisted. One Catholic priest, Father Jason Bradford, picked up the doll, dismissing her, and said, "You're just a rag doll, Annabelle. You can't hurt anyone." Lorraine begged him to be careful, but hours later, he was nearly killed when his brakes failed and he was involved in a near fatal crash. The most chilling story involves a young man who visited the museum, and after hearing Ed's account, the man defiantly banged on the glass and taunted the doll, demanding that she scratch him. Ed immediately threw him out, but on the ride home, the young man lost control of his motorcycle and was killed instantly. His girlfriend survived and later told investigators they had been laughing about the doll when the crash occurred. The Warrens' advice was simple: you do not challenge evil. This case with the possessed Raggedy Ann became the cornerstone of their legend, now inspiring an entire franchise of Hollywood films. It is crucial to note that although Ed Warren claimed to be a demonologist and he often worked with so-called priests, the Catholic Church does not formally recognize the title for lay people who are not priests themselves. Also, the Catholic Church officials rarely officially sanctioned the investigations of the Nesper. Many people believe this was just a self-appointed marketing tool that exaggerated his authority. And if the Annabelle case was the spark that ignited the Warrens' fame, then the following case was the explosion that rocketed them onto the international stage, forever linking their names to the absolute gold standard of horror, the Amityville Horror. This case takes place in a beautiful Dutch colonial home in Amityville, New York, but it wasn't just any home. A little over a year before the main events, in November 1974, a man named Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered 6 members of his own family, his parents and 4 siblings, in the house. Then, about 13 months later, in December of 1975, the Lutz family moves in. George and Kathy and their 3 children bought the house for $80,000. However, they were only there for 28 days. From the moment they moved in, things were bad. They called a Catholic priest to bless the home while they were unpacking, and as the priest went upstairs to the second floor, he began sprinkling holy water, and suddenly an unseen voice violently screamed at him to get out. The priest was terrified and quickly got out of the house. However, he did manage to warn the Lutzes not to use the upstairs room as a bedroom, so instead they used it as a sewing room. The strange sensations began on day one, and they quickly escalated. The family's personalities drastically changed, arguments broke out constantly, and George developed a chill that just wouldn't go away. He spent all of his time trying to stoke a fire. Both George's and Kathy's health rapidly declined. The Lutz's daughter started spending her time with an imaginary friend she called Jody. She described Jody as a red-eyed pig that could change size and shape and sometimes becoming larger than the house itself. Foul, mysterious odors would constantly emanate from different locations of the house, and black stains appeared on toilets and ceramic fixtures. They discovered hundreds of flies in one room, even though it was the middle of winter, and George began waking up every single night at 3:15 a.m., which chillingly coincided with the estimated time the DeFeo murders had occurred. Kathy reportedly claimed an unseen force touched her, and at one point, George allegedly woke up to see her transform into an old hag, and then the next night, she was levitating over the bed. The final night in the house was chaos. Furniture was moving, there were loud banging noises like a marching band, and the children were being terrorized. After 4 weeks of this, they had enough. They grabbed only a few essentials and went to stay with Kathy's mother in her home in Babylon, a town nearby. Marvin Scott, a news reporter with Channel 5 New York, who had covered the story, brought in Ed and Lorraine Warren about 3 weeks later. The Lutzes refused ever to step foot in the house again, so the Warrens led a team of investigators without the family present. The Warrens determined that the property had a dark history. It had once been an enclosure used by the Shinnecock Indians to house the sick and the mad, basically a place where people were essentially left to die. Also, a black magician named John Ketchum had once owned the land and was supposedly buried there. So you have all this weird energy, and then of course you have the DeFeo murders happening 13 months before the Lutzes move in. The Warrens concluded that the history created a powerful negative energy that acted as a magnet for a severe demonic infestation. During their investigation, Ed was reportedly thrown to the floor in the basement after trying to use religious provocation, and Lorraine was utterly overwhelmed by the deep sense of a demonic presence. She conducted a famous seance where she claimed to be physically overcome, seeing the horrific images of the DeFeo family's bodies lying covered in sheets. This investigation culminated in the famous figure photo, an image they captured of what appeared to be a young spirit peering out from the second floor bedroom. The Warrens' involvement with the house was crucial. They publicly declared the house to be the site of a profound demonic infestation, lending their credibility to the story just as the book The Amityville Horror was being written. However, the case was famously controversial. Skeptics and critics quickly came forward alleging that the story was a complete fabrication, a hoax cooked up by the Lutzes and original defense lawyer William Weber purely for financial gain. While the Warrens weren't the ones who created the initial claims, their high profile public endorsement and sensational evidence gathering cemented the story in the public consciousness as a true horror event. This case generated enormous wealth and publicity, making Amityville a household name and irrevocably linking the Warrens to the most significant, most sensational paranormal phenomenon of the era. In the end, there have been no further posts of activity from recent residents, but that one short stay by the Lutz family, backed by the Warrens, changed horror history forever. The house that was purchased for just $80,000 in 1975 was sold for $950,000 in 2010. This next case of the Perron family haunting in Harrisville, Rhode Island, is the inspiration for the movie The Conjuring. In January 1971, Roger and Carolyn Perron and their 5 daughters moved into a massive 14-room farmhouse. Almost immediately, they noticed strange happenings. Carolyn would find a broom had moved itself, hear sounds of scraping against a kettle when the kitchen was completely empty, and would find neat little piles of dirt right in the middle of her freshly cleaned floors. But you also live in a 14-room farmhouse, like a huge house with 5 daughters. So you're telling me that not one of your daughters picked up the broom and just moved it? I'm no professional, but maybe. Anyway, the 5 daughters also began to see spirits around the house, and although they seemed harmless, a few appeared to be malevolent. Caroline reportedly researched the home's history and found it had stayed in the same family for 8 generations. Many of the previous residents had met tragic or mysterious ends, children drowning in the nearby creek, one person was murdered, and several hanging themselves in the attic. The parents came to believe that the primary culprit was the spirit of Bathsheba Sherman, who was a real person who had lived on the property in the mid 1800s. She was rumored to be a Satanist and was even suspected of the death of the neighbor's child. According to the family's eldest daughter, Andrea Perron, the spirit saw herself as the true mistress of the house, and she resented Caroline for taking that position. Other spirits accompanied Bathsheba, sometimes smelling like rotting flesh, and the children claimed to see their beds levitating off the floor. Roger Perron, the father, often felt a cold, stinking presence behind him when he was forced to go down into the dirt-floored cellar to fix their mysteriously failing heating equipment. Which sounds a lot like the Amityville horror father, who was always cold too. Over the 10 years the Perrin family lived with the terror, Ed and Lorraine Warren had multiple trips to investigate the activity. The Warrens concluded that the family was being tormented by an aggressive, non human entity, a demonic presence intent on possessing the mother, Carolyn. The most terrifying incident they reported occurred during the seance that Lorraine conducted to try to make contact. Andrea Perrin claimed she secretly watched the event, recounting that her mother became possessed, speaking in a language that wasn't of this world and with a voice that wasn't her own. It peaked when Carolyn's chair allegedly levitated and she was then violently thrown across the room. Roger is said to have feared for his wife's mental stability and immediately kicked the Warrens out. The family's financial instability, however, prevented them from moving immediately, and they continued to live in the house until they could finally move in 1980. Once they left the property, the hauntings ceased entirely. Decades later, the Perrin case provided the primary source material for the Conjuring movie. This next case is arguably the most dramatic and controversial investigation the Warrens ever conducted. In 1986, the Snedeker family, Alan, Carmen, and their children, moved into a rental duplex in Southington, Connecticut. They soon discovered the house's history. The property had been a former funeral home. The physical evidence was actually in the basement, where the family found various mortuary items like a gurney, blood drains, a coffin hoisting apparatus, and toe tags. They reported evil and paranormal activity, including sexual attacks carried out by the spirits. The oldest son, who was already undergoing treatment for Hodgkin's disease, was reportedly experiencing abrupt and violent personality changes as well as witnessing apparitions. The Snedekers reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, supposedly begging them to investigate. The Warrens, true to form, investigated the house and officially declared the property to be possessed, confirming the family's fears that the house was infected with demons and evil spirits. This case turned out to be the perfect storm of dramatic claims. It led to a successful book and later a hit film. However, this is also the case that ultimately delivered the massive blow to the Warrens' public credibility. The author hired to write the book about the Snedeker house, Ray Garton, later confessed that he was told by the Warrens' intermediary to simply invent details. Why? Because the various members of the Snedeker family kept telling wildly conflicting and inconsistent accounts of what had happened. Garton admitted that he had to weave together the fabrications just to create a cohesive and terrifying narrative. Garton claims on his website that Ed Warren told him, quote, "All the people who come to us are crazy. Just use what you can and make the rest up. You write scary books, right? That's why we hired you. Just make it up and make it scary," end quote. Garton has since distanced himself in the book, which he considers to be the work of mostly fabricated fiction. This eventual public acknowledgement of the fabrication severely undermined the perceived authenticity of the Warrens' claims across all their cases. Yet, despite the truth coming out, the resulting book and movie were massively successful. The Warrens' decades-long success and longevity seem to be a distinct result of their savvy ability to monetize fear, effectively turning personal family tragedies and local legends into a multi-million-dollar industry. The core of the Warrens' success was establishing themselves as the indispensable experts, the only people who could fight, document, and explain demonic activity. While they claimed to conduct paranormal investigations free of charge, their livelihood came from several distinct revenue streams built around their public perception. Ed and Lorraine successfully established themselves lecturing at colleges and conventions. They would travel extensively, delivering dramatic and chilling narratives while sharing what they claimed to be photographic and auditory evidence from their cases. For these appearances, they charged significant fees, which served as their primary means of making a living for decades. Many photography experts have dismissed the Warrens' photographic evidence, stating they are textbook examples of pareidolia or seeing patterns in random stimuli or simply camera flash reflections in the dark. The bulk of their wealth and lasting financial impact came from shrewdly securing the intellectual property rights to most of their sensational case files. By establishing ownership over the stories of the Snedekers, Perrin, and other families, they ensured they would profit every time a book, movie, or other major adaptation was produced. The most profound success of this business model is the Conjuring universe. Based mostly entirely on the Warrens case files, this franchise has become the highest grossing horror franchise in history, with a total global earnings grossing over $2.7 billion dollars against a combined budget of around 263 million dollars. This commercial powerhouse ensured the Warrens' financial legacy long after their deaths. The Warrens often acquired exclusive rights from the families they investigated. This meant that while the general haunting events were public domain, the family's personal stories and unique experiences belonged exclusively to the Warrens. The monetization of their cases was so much that it frequently triggered lawsuits, highlighting the tension between the true story claims and the financial incentive. The Warrens and Warner Brothers have faced lawsuits from individuals like author Gerald Brittle, who wrote the 1980 book The Demonologist, claiming that the Conjuring films copied his exclusive accounts of the Warrens' case files without his authorization. These lawsuits questioned who truly owned the rights to tell the stories of real life people and events. Brittle claimed his exclusive rights to the Warren case files dated back to a 1978 contract. Warner Bros. Argued the films were based on historical facts, not Brittle's book. However, Brittle countered, stating that the events involving demons and witches were not historical facts. Instead, the movies were based on the Warrens' fictionalized stories, which he owned. They reached an undisclosed settlement. Of course. They're like, shut up, go away, here's some money. Claims of financial exploitation were ongoing, particularly following author Ray Garton's confession that he was instructed by the Warrens intermediary to make up details of the Snedeker book. This confirmed the suspicion that the mission for a marketable narrative sometimes took precedent over the factual consistency of the families involved, ensuring the story was scary enough to sell book and film rights. Ultimately, the Warrens brand was built on the combination of religious conviction, theatrical showmanship, and business acumen that effectively turned the concept of evil into a profitable $2 billion empire. The Warrens faced fierce criticism from the scientific community, skeptical organizations like the New England Skeptical Society, NESS or NESS, the journalists who labeled them everything from sensationalists to dangerous frauds. The most consistent complaint was the total lack of objective evidence to support their sensational claims. Critics often pointed out the Warrens' claims of physical proof were always anecdotal or subjective. Their best evidence often consisted of blurry, low quality photos that could be explained by flash errors, ambiguous audio recordings open to interpretation, or artifacts like the Annabelle doll, whose supernatural origins could not be confirmed in a controlled environment. Skeptics who toured the Warrens' occult museum dismissed the collective items as blarney and found nothing evil about them. Lorraine Warren's abilities as a clairvoyant medium could never be scientifically verified. Skeptics allege that her psychic readings were merely instances of cold reading, a psychological technique used by mentalists and scammers to glean information about a person or a haunted location through subtle cues and general statements, making the subject believe the reader has supernatural knowledge. Today, you can watch mentalists perform using these exact skills on people, like at Spidey Hypnosis on YouTube. Skeptics argue that the Warrens' strong religious framework was their greatest marketing tool. By framing every major haunting as a severe demonic infestation requiring Catholic intervention, they instantly inflated their perceived severity and urgency of the case. This increased their public visibility, the media frenzy, and the subsequent monetary value of the story's rights. By adhering literally and religiously to the predetermined conclusion that a demon was involved, they bypassed the need for concrete and scientific proof. Lorraine herself noted that the problem with skeptics was that, quote, they don't blame anything on God, end quote. The implication was that if science couldn't explain it, it must be the devil, and the Warrens were the only ones authorized to fight him. Which is not true. But that's what they wanted you to believe. Critics accused them of exploiting vulnerable families who were often dealing with severe personal problems such as mental illness, addiction, or domestic abuse. Psychologist Robert Gordon suggested that people often turn to concepts like demon possession to explain difficult family dynamics, a narrative the Warrens were eager to validate for the sake of a book deal. The couple remained committed to their claims and their faith until the end. Ed Warren passed away on August 23rd, 2006, at the age of 79, and Lorraine Warren continued to consult and maintain the museum until her death on April 18th, 2019, at the age of 92, ensuring the continuity of the Warren legacy. Judy Warren Spera, Ed and Lorraine's only child, and her husband Tony Spera have kept the spirit of the museum and the investigations alive. Judy was often in the background of the sensational cases, but her family's work became the foundation of her life. Judy met her husband, Tony Spera, back in 1979. At the time, Tony was a police officer in Bloomfield, Connecticut. The story is that Tony saw Judy drive by, she waved at him and smiled, then sped out of sight. Tony was smitten and chased after her, thinking he had an advantage with his police car. However, he lost sight of her when she pulled into a strip mall and walked into a shop. Apparently, Judy thought he was her friend Al, who helped set up a meeting later that night between her and Tony. Tony met Judy at what he jokingly says was an exclusive restaurant, a local Jim Dandy's fried chicken store. After After seeing her close, Tony was in love. Tony likened their love story to a scene from the movie American Graffiti, causing some to speculate that even this story was made up to put the couple in a more positive light. Tony and Judy married, and he eventually left police work to become an integral part of the Warrens' operations. Today, Judy and Tony remain the key figures of the Warrens' ongoing work, especially after Ed's passing in 2006 and Lorraine's passing in 2019. Tony now serves as a key administrator of the New England Society for Psychic Research, NESPR, and together they represent the continuation of the Warrens' mission, managing the legacy and the case files. Another figure plays a super controversial role in their story, Judith Penny, who later got married and now goes by Judy Hayden. Her closeness to the couple for decades has brought both loving tributes and shocking, career-threatening accusations. Judy Penny, now Hayden, was a very present figure in the Warrens' lives for roughly 40 years. This long-time involvement is evident in her online tributes, where she frequently pays homage to Ed and Lorraine on birthdays and anniversaries. She captions multiple pictures, mostly of Ed, stating she loves and misses him and thinks of him daily. She claims an undeniable intimacy within the household, and she was often seen assisting and traveling with Lorraine in the years leading up to Lorraine's passing. This personal connection, however, occasionally reveals details that directly contradict the Warrens' public brand. In a notable social media post from 6 years ago, Judy shared a photo of an old Raggedy Ann doll owned by the Warrens, describing it as a good doll that had been in her home for over 40 years and was now on sale on eBay. The deepest concern about the Warrens, however, came directly from Judy Penny herself. In the wake of the successful Conjuring film franchise, accusations came out that Ed Warren had initiated a decades-long sexual relationship with Penny, starting when he was 27 and she was just 15 years old. This explosive accusation included several shocking claims. Penny claimed the relationship lasted for 40 years and that she lived in the Warrens' home for much of that time. She alleged that she became pregnant with Ed's child and that Lorraine persuaded her to have an abortion, arguing that the resulting scandal would ruin the Warrens' business. Lorraine then allegedly instructed Penny to lie and say an intruder had raped her. Adding further weight to the conspiracy, it was later revealed that the contract for the Conjuring film series stipulated that Ed and Lorraine could not be portrayed engaging in extramarital affairs or engaging in crimes like sex with a minor. While the Warrens' daughter and son-in-law denied ever witnessing the alleged conduct, these accusations, which were uncovered in connection with the lawsuit over the Conjuring film rights, stand in direct opposition to the wholesome, pious Catholic image the Warrens projected to the world, permanently linking their global brand of horror with the disturbing personal controversy. Many people believe Ed and Lorraine Warren fabricated their stories, and some are drawn to them for entertainment. However, there are indeed some strange occurrences that have really happened with the Annabelle doll. You can't look past that. Just this year, a viral rumor went around social media that Annabelle had disappeared while on tour near a plantation that caught fire and a prison break. Its owner later confirmed that it was safely back in its display case in Connecticut. However, shortly after, when the tour stopped in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania on July 13th, Annabelle's handler, Dan Rivera, died unexpectedly from a cardiac-related event that was ruled a natural death. The Adams County coroner, Francis Dutro, wrote in the September 4th release that Annabelle was not present in the room at the time of his passing. I like how he included that. Like, this needs to be said. Annabelle was not in the room, so she couldn't have done it. The day before his death, Rivera had hosted a showing of Annabelle while leading the sold-out Devils on the Run tour. Not even a month after Dan Rivera's death, comedian Matt Rife and paranormal investigator Elton Castee purchased Ed Lorraine Warren's home and occult museum on August 1st, 2025. The two are also serving as legal guardians for the collection of haunted artifacts, including the Annabelle doll, for at least the next 5 years. They plan to open the property for overnight investigations and tours, which is like super creepy. Chris McKinnell, the Warrens' grandson, son of Judy Spera, says he thinks, quote, people are being flippant with some of his grandparents' most notorious artifacts, end quote. McKinnell called his stepfather, Tony, an entertainer, which makes you wonder, like, did he just take over that showmanship role that Ed played for so long, and Tony stepped right into that role? I don't know. I hate scary movies. I did not want to do this because I was like, I don't want to have to watch The Conjuring. Luckily, I did not have to watch The Conjuring to do this episode. So I would love to hear you guys' thoughts. Of course, every single episode, I want to hear your thoughts. So until next week, my friends, stay skeptical, and I will see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast written, hosted, and produced by me, Danny Mercy. Special thanks to Lindsay for research and writing. If you love the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening. Follow us on social media at rabbit.holepodcast and visit our website at stayskeptical.com for everything else.